Today, 2 hours of news, current affairs, and opinion brought to you by Beyond Beijing. With in-depth panel discussions on domestic and global issues, Today brings you the story behind the headlines. Locally produced, but with a distinctly international flavor. Today.
You're listening to Today on Beyond Beijing, 2 hours of news and opinion. I'm Thomas Rippey in Beijing.
I'm Xu Qindong. NATO has agreed to take command of coalition military operations in Libya. Rebel forces with the coalition air support has pushed the west to the outskirts of Muammar Gaddafi's hometown of Sirte. In the first hour of our show today, we'll take a look at the international intervention in Libya.
The second hour, authorities have denied permission to a man who wants to give his son a different surname from his own. Find out what people are saying about it in the second hour of today's edition of Online Unleashed. UN Resolution 1973 authorizes the establishment of a no-fly zone over Libya and authorizes any steps necessary to protect Libyan civilians. Coalition forces have interpreted protecting civilians to include attacking Colonel Gaddafi's ground forces. Critics say the coalition has exceeded the intent of the resolution. So, joining us today to discuss the international military activity in Libya, we have in the studio Mr. Li Guofu, who's a senior research fellow at the China Institute of International Studies. On the phone, we have Abderrahim Foukara, who is the Al Jazeera chief correspondent based in Washington, and also Mr. Gerald Celente, who is a publisher of TrendsJournal, which forecasts and analyzes businesses, social, economic, and political and other trends. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
So let's now just take a quick look at one of the more recent things that's happened over the weekend. NATO, as was expected, has assumed command from the United States. Let's start with Abderrahim. Do you think this is a real significant step, or is this sort of something that they're just trying to manage the perception of who's in charge rather than who's actually in charge?
Well, I mean, it's a step that has obviously some implications, perhaps more on the psychological level as far as the people of Libya and the wider Arab world are concerned. In my eyes, much more important.
We seem to be having a little bit of trouble with that phone line. Abderrahim, hang on. We're going to give you a quick call back. So, Gerald, what's your sense from the United States perspective? Is there a sense? Are people buying this? Does it look to the American populace like America's no longer in control of this operation, or do people still view it as being an essentially American-led operation?
Well, it's hard to say what the American people think, but this is just a selling of the war. Just for example, now every time you hear reports coming out of Afghanistan, it's always NATO forces, when in fact the vast majority are American forces. And it's just a selling of the war. And very interestingly, as we keep hearing NATO, 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 who is really using most of the firepower? Where is it coming from? Where did all those, cruise missiles launch from? Who's flying the most sorties? And also, more importantly, this war was sold as a beginning from the Arab League. That's how the first sales pitch happened, that the Arab League was in favor of this. And now all you're hearing about is NATO.
And is it working? Are people buying it?
Well, it's difficult. In some areas they are, but it's very important to also understand that of the last 10 wars that the United States has launched, this one has the lowest amount of popularity, according to the latest polls. Only about 49% of the population is supporting it, but the media has done a wonderful, wonderful job in pumping this thing up. For example, on the very same day that the headlines screamed, and this is the first day of the attacks that the United States became involved in, 25 killed in Libya. You couldn't find a peep about the 50 that were killed in Yemen, or the, I believe, 38 that were killed by the United States Predator drone that kind of missed those suspected militants in Pakistan and killed civilians, or the refugee crisis in the Ivory Coast, of which there are 1 million people now, and every day dozens and if not scores are being slaughtered. So it's America loves their demons. Let's not forget Saddam Hussein or the butcher of Baghdad. So it's pretty much a propaganda war, and at this time the United States is winning it for the most part, the hearts and minds of the people.
Okay, Li Guofu, what's your perception about this NATO involvement and NATO sort of assuming command?
I think first, you have to recognize, and from the very beginning, the day of the war started, President Obama has said very clearly that it is not the U.S. war, and it is the U.S. and together with its allies to implement the UN resolutions. It is an international act to protect the human casualties might happen in Libya. And definitely, President Obama has not fully consulted with U.S. senators with both parties. So, President Obama has some problems at home about, how to conduct this, they may call it the military mission or military war in Libya. So this is part of the reasons why the United States is so eagerly, so keen to transfer the commander to the NATO's. Definitely, I agree with the previous speakers has said that this is a kind of the brand of the war. They may say this is not a job. It is requested by the Arab League. You see that some Arab countries are enjoying the military corporations or military operations in Libya. So so the American first, they want to keep a low profile, try to put this is not our original aim. We are coming here just to help the Libyans from the casualties or the humanity disasters from taking over Colonel Gaddafi. So they try to avoid what American is done in Libya.
Mm-hmm. Well, Abdurraham, are you with us?
Yes, I am.
Okay. The U.S. Secretary of Defense, Robert Gates, has said that probably in Libya there's no vital interest for the United States. And also we have seen this all along reluctance of U.S. involvement in the airstrikes against Libya. How do you see, basically in Washington, D.C.?
Well, to me, by going down the path of attacking civilians in Libya, and because he went out there and he used terminology that suggested that he would commit a slaughter against his own people, Colonel Gaddafi put not just Libya, but the whole of the Arab world in a very difficult position, because as you know, the Arab world is very weary and wary of Western intervention in Arab and Muslim lands, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, and other places. And now Libya has been added to the list. But on the other hand, because of the terminology that Colonel Gaddafi used in some of his speeches, talking about cleansing house to house, cleansing street to street, and urging his forces to deal with the rebels without mercy, and because he looked poised to take Benghazi and wreak revenge on the people of Benghazi, the people of the Arab world found themselves confronted with this very difficult choice. What happens if he does take Benghazi? A lot of people asked. He was going to commit a slaughter. Do they support the intervention of NATO, as a matter of principle, they don't. But if NATO and the West hadn't stepped in, what would have happened to Benghazi? And beyond that, what would have happened to the revolutions in Tunisia and Egypt if Colonel Gaddafi managed to re-ascertain his authority over all of Libya? And I guess that question is still alive today. What happens if Gaddafi stays in power, even if his authority doesn't extend beyond Tripoli? What strains, what political strains is he going to put on neighboring Egypt and neighboring Tunisia? What will happen to the Arab Spring if he survives? All these questions, these difficult questions, they are obviously hard to answer from an Arab point of view. So on the one hand, nobody in the Arab world wants NATO interference in Libya, whether it's NATO, whether it's France, Britain, or the United States. But at the same time, given the current atmosphere in the region, given what is being called the Arab Spring, I think there are very few people in the Arab world, not to say in Libya also, who want Gaddafi to survive.
Yeah,
politically, that is.
We'll touch upon the domestic situation in Libya, the battle and the forces, and also we are seeing some Arab countries like Qatar and the UAE are participating in the implementation of this no-fly zone and the UN mandate. Gerald, how do you see this Arab countries' response to the Allied airstrike against Libya?
Well, first of all, the UAE and Qatar's involvement is minimal. It's just flowers. I mean, they're not really doing anything. What, 4 airplanes? Flying missions. It's a United States dominated effort, and France and the UK. Those are the 3 major players, and these are very difficult questions. But here's really the crux of it. Number one, let's quote President Obama when he was candidate Obama back in 2007, when asked if the United States, if the president should unilaterally take his nation to war. And he said, quote, "The president does not have power under the Constitution to unilaterally authorize a military attack in a situation that does not involve stopping an actual or imminent threat to the nation." So as an American, we used to have something that has been long abrogated, primarily under Bush and continued under Obama, called the Constitution. If this is an Arab issue, then it's an Arab issue. It isn't a U.S. issue. It's not a NATO issue. And I have to say, and I will say this categorically, it's not, if Libya's major export was broccoli, the United States wouldn't be there, just like they're silent, with exception of saying how they have to have dialogue in Yemen, they have to come to agreement in Bahrain, not a peep about the Ivory Coast or the Sudan, nothing about the other countries. And the other issue is, that's never discussed, look, there's no question that Gaddafi is a megalomaniac and a tyrant, but who are the rebels? Are the rebels former monarchists from King Idris? Are the rebels that are being reported factions of Al-Qaeda? Who are the rebels? This is a civil war. It's an Arab issue, it's not a U.S. issue, and it's not a NATO issue. And furthermore, the United States is fighting wars in Iraq for fake reasons and draining, I'm talking as an American, and draining our treasury and expanding the wars in Afghanistan. Now, of course, the Pakistanis are fighting a proxy war for the United States, and now, as our economy is declining, we're fighting another war in Libya. But of course, we cannot call it a war in the United States because the White House press secretary scolded the reporters, and he said, quote, it's a time-limited, scope-limited military action in context with our international partners with the objective of protecting civilian life in Libya from Muammar Gaddafi and his forces.
Okay, on that we're going to take one of our first breaks here. We're going to be back with more on the situation in Libya right after this.
Hi, I'm David Moser. It's always fun for me to go on the show. The topics vary widely, and there's a good mix of guests, but the quality of the show is always great. I always learn a lot when I go on the show, and I hope the audience gets something out of it too.
You're listening to Today on Beyond Beijing, 2 hours of news and opinion. I'm Thomas Rippey in Beijing. We're talking today about the no-fly zone in Libya and the implications that it's having. We have in the studio Mr. Li Guofu, who's a senior research fellow at the China Institute of International Studies. On the phone we have Mr. Abderrahim Fukara, who's an Al Jazeera chief correspondent based in Washington. And also on the other phone line, Mr. Gerald Celente, who's a publisher of the TrendsJournal, which forecasts and analyzes business, socioeconomic, political, and other trends. So just before the break, Gerald was talking about his opinion that the U.S. doesn't really belong there, and that the involvement by some of the Arab countries like Qatar and the United Arab Emirates is minimal and essentially meaningless. So, Li Guofu, do you think, when you look at the forces that have been committed, and it is a relatively small number of airplanes by some of the Arab countries, is it more about the way the military action there is being sold, that they want to show somehow that there's a broader coalition than just NATO? So is it primarily a symbolic involvement?
Yeah, definitely. And this is the first time, for the Arab League, they have a kind of this agreement to request the UN Security Council to set up a no-fly zone in Libya. And the first time, when Arab leagues in the war fight another, the member of Arab League, and definitely, you would consider, the Arab League at the present, situation. There is a wide division among the different Arab the members, and you have to also look at the current, the leader structure of the Arab League. The General Secretary of the Arab League, now he is going to quit as the current position, and he wants to be as the candidate hopeful for the next Egyptian president. So I think there is various reasons behind why the current the Arab League has adopted this kind of position, and to request the Arab the UN Security Council to set the no-fly zone. This definitely the decision has provided the West a kind of the background for them to launch this kind of military actions. So I personally believe, and the part of the Arab Leagues joined them so far, and Qatar and the Emirates and the United States is urging country like Jordan and to participate. There are some other countries also under the pressure by the United States to participate in the current military operations in order to show that this is not the West military action against one of the Arab countries. This is not the NATO job. This is the Arab countries' job. What the NATO, what the United States currently is doing is to try to help the Arab countries, to help the Arab people, to help the Libya people. So I think, but, we can consider the capability of, the Arab Leagues, the Qatar Emirates military power. So though they join this kind of a military operation has been mainly symbolically and economically. From the military perspective, they are almost nothing. But from the political perspective, they are very, very important. They are giving the symbol. They are giving sort of excuses for the West, especially the United States, because the U.S. had very bad reputations in the Arab wars. If without the participation of some Arab countries, it would be regarded once again, this is West invasion of the Arab countries. This is maybe some people has already called it, this is kind of, the Crusaders against the Muslim countries.
Okay. Abderrahim, what's your sense on this? Is this the involvement of Qatar and the UAE? How important is that symbol to people across the Arab world? Are they buying it, or are they seeing this as being sort of countries that are being pushed by the United States into this involvement?
No, I mean, I totally agree with Lee to the extent that military involvement in these issues, whether we're talking about Libya or we're talking about previous occasions such as the 1991 war to liberate Kuwait, Arab military occupation participation it has never been significant. In this time around, it's even less significant than it was in 1991. But what's important about the decision of the Arab League this time around is that it was forthcoming not just because the Arab League came under pressure from the West and particularly from the United States to provide or help provide political cover to military operations in Libya. The Arab League came under pressure from something else, and this is what's new in these dynamics. It came under pressure from the fact that there are sweeping changes happening throughout the Middle East, and for the Arab League to stand by and not to be seen by Arabs as doing something to help Libyans would have been a very difficult position to sustain by the Arab League. There's a second factor, which is that the Secretary General of the Arab League, Amr Moussa, intends to run in the Egyptian presidential election. And for him to have opposed being seen to come to the help of Libyan civilians who were under threat from the forces of Muammar Gaddafi would have been a very risky business for him with Egyptian public opinion, who is as opposed to NATO intervening in Libya as it is leaving Libyan civilians to their own devices to be slaughtered. Now, that's one thing. Another thing that I have to say, and it's perhaps more in reference to what Gerald, a couple of points that Gerald made. Gaddafi, in his one of his speeches, he said a lot of things that sounded very frightening, not just to Libyans, including the wretched opposition, as some people call it. But they sounded frightening to Arab public opinion at large, especially given the changes happening throughout the Arab world. He said, he was talking to the rebels, he said that if anyone doesn't love Gaddafi, anyone who doesn't love Gaddafi doesn't deserve to live. And these are very thorny issues. The fear in the Arab world, and I keep saying that the Arab world is opposed to see the big threat in NATO's interference in Libya, in another Arab Muslim country. But the fear in the Arab world was that what many people in the Arab world have come to accept as the Arab Spring, their fear is that that Arab Spring would be allowed to be buried in Libya. And the fear was that if somebody didn't stand up to al-Qaddafi and his forces, he would prevail, and by prevailing, the Arab Spring would come to an end. Tunisia, where the situation is still fragile, would be further undermined. Egypt would be further undermined. And when you look at what somebody like Ali Abdullah Saleh, the president of Yemen, has been doing since the trouble started in Libya, it seems that Colonel Gaddafi's position has emboldened some of the other Arab leaders to
come on now. That's really unfair.
Wait a minute.
Because the Yemen
Hey, Gerald, let me
long before
Gerald.
what happened in Libya.
Gerald,
let him finish, and then we'll get back to you.
Okay, you had mentioned to jump in, so that's why I did.
No, that's fine. Let him finish, and then we'll let you have your
I
time.
apologize.
That's all right.
I will have to finish. Otherwise, I'm going to hang up. You're going to have to let me finish.
Please do. Please do.
I said I apologize.
I
misunderstood the
Gerald,
instructions.
I let you finish, so you listen, and you make your point.
I apologize. I misunderstood.
All right. Abderrahim, go ahead, Gerald. We'll get to your point right after he's done.
Okay. So some of the other Arab leaders seem to have concluded that if you use brute force, you may be able to survive to fight another day. So these fears are now percolating in Arab public opinion. And obviously, the fear is that if Gaddafi survives, then others like him will survive. Does that mean that they want NATO or the United States or France or anybody else to intervene in Libya? No, they don't. But this is a difficult choice that they are faced with. Now, just a final point about the issue that Gerald raised about the rebels. I do agree that the impression that we get from the rebels is that, to say the least, they raise a lot of questions, not just about them, but about the future of Libya should they take control of that future. But ultimately, Gaddafi has had 42 years as the head of that country. Many Libyans have come to see those 43 years as having brought them into a very difficult situation. They want something else. They want somebody else to have a chance. Whether the rebels will be able to offer Libyans that chance is something that we obviously still don't know. But many Libyans and many Arabs feel that because we don't know who the rebels are and what they will do, does not necessarily mean that Gaddafi should be allowed to continue beyond his 42nd year in power.
Okay, Gerald, go ahead.
Well, first of all, on the issue of Yemen, this happened before the Libyan uprisings. And where's the Arab League screaming and yelling about those slaughters? And then let's go and look what's going on in Bahrain with Saudi troops in there putting down that revolution. And then let's go move over to Egypt when that happened and listen to Hillary Clinton saying that the government was stable and Vice President Biden saying he wasn't a dictator until the course started changing. Then the United States changed its tune. And for all of this talk about what has to be done with Gaddafi, this is a Libyan issue. The hypocrisy in front of our very eyes could not be more clear. Nothing with Yemen, nothing with Bahrain, nothing in Oman with those uprisings happening, nothing going on with the United States when the Tunisian uprisings began, and it is not, and I have to make this 100% clear, it is against the Constitution of the United States to become involved in all of these countries. So, as was pointed out, the Arab League was the front. That was the gauntlet that was thrown down at first, and it was just admitted that this was used as a cover for the United States to become involved. If the Arabs are having a problem with Gaddafi, let them go fight the problem out. And as far as public opinion, do you think those Egyptians living on $10 a day and all those kids that have university degrees in worthlessness care about what's going on in Libya? They want jobs. They don't care.
They do.
So,
you don't know that.
Well, you don't either. But the point
No, I
being
do.
is that you are so.
I am from the region.
Now you're interrupting
Okay.
me.
All right, gentlemen, I'm going to ask you both to calm down for a second. We're going to get over to Professor Lee.
No, you lectured me when I interrupted you.
All right. I need both of you to calm down. I want to get to Professor Lee for a second. I want to ask him. Gerald raised an interesting point about why is there involvement in Libya and not in some of these other countries where we've seen uprisings, and why was there not in Tunisia and Egypt? Professor Lee, what's your opinion on that?
I think both the previous speakers has made the point, and definitely I believe that when the mass uprising in the Middle East from the beginning from the end of last year or the beginning of the last year, we can see the different approach to each of the individual countries. And yes, would regard each of these countries accordingly to their national interests, or according to the U.S. relations with any individual countries. And Mr. Gerald has already mentioned, American has adopted a different approach to the country like Egypt, to the country like Yemen, to Yemen, and the country like Tunisia and Libya and Jordan, and then some other countries, not only the Arab countries, for example, Iran. They have also some of the uprisings. So Americans, I think the attitudes and the policies and disregard what the governments have been done to their the mass uprisings, but according to Americans' own national interests. So I think this is the facts. I don't believe among these facts we need to discuss. American treated all these countries equally, or there's no difference. No, this is not the facts. So first, I think this is the fact is American and approach American policy to each of these individual countries according to its own national interests, not taking into account whether they are democratic or they are, the mass uprising or whatsoever. You may give a very beautiful names. No, this is hypocrisy. As for the Libya issue is very, very different. I think so far, we have talking, about the rivals, what the rivals they are. It doesn't matter, and what Gaddafi may, what according to what he said, he would, cause humanitarian disasters and so on and so forth. But I think this is definitely we have sort of according to what Colonel Gaddafi said. But the real fact is that since the military operations, more human casualties have been occurred. Nobody at this moment can tell me or can tell the world exactly what Libya would like for tomorrow. And according to Libya's social structure, the political structure, and it is based on the tribes. So whether there will be to promote democracy as the Western like, or there will be gradually flag into a civil war, then there will be thousands of people has been killed during the fighting between these. Those the tribes that we have seen in Iraq or Afghanistan. We don't know. So I'm just to put in a big question here, and whether the military intervention is to prevent the human and the casualties, to prevent the humanitarian disasters, or they are going to lead what they try to prevent it.
Okay, on that we're going to take one more quick break. We'll be back with more on the situation in Libya right after this.
Hi, my name is Io Johnson. I'm an Africa specialist and I'm quite a regular on the Today Show. I think the Today Show has been quite spectacular, delivering some of the best news from the African continent. and I've been truly delighted to have been part of the entire team delivering that information, and I'm sure it's been well received around the world.
According to Chinese law, parents can name their child whatever they want, but local authorities turned down one father's request to give his son a different surname. To find out why, join our discussion in Online Unleashed in the second hour.
You're listening to Today on Beyond Beijing, 2 hours of news and opinion. I'm Thomas Rippey in Beijing. We're talking today about the no-fly zone over Libya and how that's playing out.
Well, one of the goals of the Allied forces, the airstrikes, either stated or unstated, is widely understood as, to topple the Gaddafi regime. So I want to ask Abderrahim, will airstrikes be enough, to really get rid of Gaddafi from Libya?
Well, let me first of all address the last issue that Lee touched upon before we went to break. I think he made a very important point, which is that whatever position the U.S. Or any of the other Western countries involved in the situation in Libya, they're obviously doing it because of the way they define their own interests, rather than because of the way Libyans see their interests. I don't think he and I disagree on that. But I would like to ask him if you were sitting in Benghazi and you heard some of the speeches made by Colonel Gaddafi or his son, in which he threatened to cleanse house by house, street by street. If you were in Benghazi as a Libyan, would you have wanted to take the chance and wait until he took Benghazi to find out whether he was actually going to carry out the threat or not? Well, Libyans in Benghazi told us they weren't prepared to wait and find out whether he was going to do it. They took him up on his own word, and they wanted protection. As for the point that Gerald made about Yemen and Bahrain, I want to remind him that President Ali Abdullah Saleh did, before events started in Libya, did seem like he was teetering on the brink, and that, he looked like he was on his way out. But when he saw what Gaddafi did, at least that, the public perception in the Middle East, I'm not reporting this as a fact, but and perception can be very important in these situations. The perception among Arabs is that because he saw the way Gaddafi handled the situation in Libya, he decided to take a different approach to the situation in Yemen. Now, the issue of getting rid of Gaddafi, I don't think at this particular point in time, nobody knows how the situation will finally pan out. When the no-fly zone was adopted by the Security Council, and it said by using any means necessary, the coalition has to stop the threat that civilians faced in Libya, I think that a lot of people read between the lines that by any means necessary, one of those means is to get rid of Colonel Gaddafi in one way or another, because, and again, reading between the lines, a lot of people thought that if he survived, he would continue to threaten civilians in Libya. Now, today, for example, over the last 24 hours, we've seen this big advance westward by the rebels, and we don't know whether their march towards Benghazi will end up toppling the colonel there, or whether he'll put up a fight in a way that will enable him to survive, at least in Benghazi, thus leading to some sort of partition of Libya. We don't know. The issue of civil war, is there a civil war in Libya? Well, some people say, I heard Lee say that it is a civil war, but But I heard many Libyans saying, no, this is not a civil war. This is about Libyans who no longer want to have Colonel Gaddafi, and they're trying to get rid of him, and he has some supporters whom he's using to enable himself to fight another day. If he survives, what are the implications for Libya, for the Arab world, for the West? I think we can all discuss these issues, but there's absolutely no doubt that in the same way that the United States and France and Britain have their own particular reasons, and they're not altogether unrelated to oil, the rebels are aware of that, and yet they decided to seek protection. That's obviously making a lot of people in the Arab world nervous, both about the prospects that the rebels would have faced without NATO's intervention, but also they are very concerned about the intervention itself because, as we all know, Arabs and Muslims have had an experience with that kind of intervention in Iraq, and it continues in Afghanistan regardless of who leads the operation in Libya, whether it's the United States or NATO. I think people recall that in Afghanistan, NATO has been responsible for killing many, many civilians, but the rebels in Libya at the end of the day wanted protection. They got it. Now, what will they do should they prevail with regard to the ambitions of the Western countries? I think that's another question that a lot of people will be debating.
Right. As we said that, this is probably widely understood as the end of the Gaddafi government, probably is the goal of the coalition for, action here. Gerald, is that the goal of getting rid of Gaddafi a legitimate goal?
No, it's not any of the business of the United States. And Abdel-Harim makes all of these sweeping statements of conjecture on why the Bahraini king or emir, whatever title he has, is doing what he's doing because of the way Gaddafi behaved. It's ludicrous. They have their own agenda, and the point that I keep making that no one wants to seem to face is the hypocrisy here. What was going on in Yemen continues to go on in Yemen. Why isn't the United States coming out against Yemen? Well, if you read the media, they will say because Saleh is the United States ally in its war on terror. Why isn't the United States making such a big fuss about what's going on in Bahrain? Hey, it couldn't be because the Fifth Fleet is stationed there, could it be? Oh, no. And who are these rebels? For Abdel-Harim to say, well, we don't know who they are, or to listen to Senator Joseph Lieberman in the United States, anything has to be better than Gaddafi. Well, gee, I remember when the United States supported the Mujahideen in Afghanistan to throw out the Russians. And now, of course, their name is the Taliban, and the United States is fighting them there now. The hypocrisy of this could not be clearer. To me, it's all about oil. It's all about oil in Iraq, and it's all about oil in Libya. Whatever problems are happening in Libya.
Let Gerald finish, and then we'll get back to you on your point. Let Gerald finish, please.
What would you have done to protect the people of Benghazi? Would you have
Abdel-Harim, you lectured me about interrupting. Now, you just let me finish, and then I'll answer your question. It's not our business. Where America is not the policeman of the world. How about fixing Detroit? We can't afford this. And again, look what's going on as we're speaking, all of us. The slaughter that's going on in the Ivory Coast. Do you hear Sarko, the American, speaking out against this? Do you hear Cameron all in a tizzy about what's going on, the slaughter there? No.
It's an interesting point. Abdel-Harim, do you want to respond?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think Gerald seems to be arguing with himself here. Nobody is contesting that there is hypocrisy here. I haven't heard anybody on the show say that there isn't hypocrisy. Of course there is hypocrisy. But what I'm saying is the rebels in Libya have opted to ask for protection. And I was asking Lee and I was asking Gerald, if they were in Benghazi and they heard the speeches of Gaddafi threatening to cleanse them house to house, would they have taken the chance of waiting to find out what was going to happen to them if Gaddafi had taken Benghazi back? That's the question. The issue of hypocrisy, of course there is hypocrisy. There's hypocrisy on the part of the United States, on the part of France, on the part of Britain, on the part of the Arab countries. Everybody is taking a hypocritical approach. But you're not answering the crux of the question. What do you think should have happened to the rebels? What do you think they should have done?
Again,
in
answering that question, why wasn't the question answered in Bahrain?
No.
Why wasn't it answered in Yemen? Why is it being? It's not. First of all, it's not a question for the United States to answer, and the only reason they haven't answered it in those other places are because of the reasons that I gave. And if it's an Arab issue, let the Arab people fight this out and not drag the rest of the world into their brothers' problems.
Okay.
Well, no,
I want to hear from
with
Professor
you.
Lee on this real quick. Let's hear from Professor Lee.
I totally disagree with you, Gerald, because let me just say this very quickly. The United States, the West as a whole, owes the Libyans something because the United States, Britain, and others, let's just recall the role that Tony Blair in having the sanctions lifted on Libya, and in re-establishing trade links with the regime of Colonel Muammar Gaddafi. Why did they do that? They did it for whatever reason they did. They owe a debt to those Libyans, especially because they did ask for protection.
Okay, Professor Lee, let's hear from Professor Lee, please. Let's hear from Professor Lee, please.
I think, the UN resolutions was a direct response to the fear of what might happen in Benghazi, and we have seen the one of the sentence, all necessary means will be taken to protect the human, the rights of human, the casualties. I think this is I think it's the phrase or this sentence was specially referred to to protect the Benghazi. Then the UN got the mandate to have a non-fly zone to provide a conducive atmosphere for the conflicting parties to find ways to have a kind of negotiations. In no way the UN resolutions provided any legal basis for the West directly engaged in civil war in Libya. In no way, give the West any mandate to change the regimes in Libya. In no way give the West legitimate in the civil war side with the rebels, provided the rebels with a military umbrella, and in no ways, to tipple the balance in the battleground. I think we are talking something is totally different. First, the UN resolutions is provided what you said, and that was exactly the international community are fear and scare what would happen after Colonel Gaddafi may take the city of Benghazi. That's why the UN resolutions was hurriedly adopted. Very severe, very specific words or phrases have been taken to protect it. The humanity disasters may occur in Benghazi. Then also, I think, general, he provided a framework. And this framework would provide a conducive atmosphere for the conflicting parties in Libya may have dialogue, started to talk what they're going to do. I think, this is my personal opinion that, the future or the fate of Libya should be decided by the Libyans, not by the West, not by outsiders.
Well, a part of a segment, an important segment of Libyan society, did ask for that protection, whether you and I agree with the intervention of the West in Libya or not. They did ask for it. That is a fact. And the other thing is that you keep talking about civil war as if that's the consensus. Many, many, many Libyans, and I speak to them every day, do not see what's happening in Libya as civil war. They see it as a revolution against a dictator who ruled them for 42 years and who threatened to cleanse them house to house, door to door, street to street. And I go back to my original question. I put it to you, Lee, also. What would you have done if you were Libyan, sitting in Benghazi, and you heard those frightening speeches made by the colonel? What would you have done?
I think this is the reasons why the UN adopted the UN resolutions and to provide the non-threat zone and may take the necessary means to protect what might happen in Benghazi. Well, this is not, we say that, you said it's not a civil war. We can see this is armed the rivals. Now, this is provided by the Americans, provided by, the Western countries. They have the commandos inside. They have the covered by the West, the air powers, armed helicopters. The rebels was underway, launched the offensive. This is not, if it's not war, then what do we call it? This is the revolution. This is what called it the peaceful democracy. No, this is not the sort of peaceful protests. This is the war.
Well, he turned it, Gaddafi turned it into a violent confrontation. It started off as a peaceful demonstration, the same as we saw in Tunisia, the same as we saw in Egypt, the same as we saw initially in many other Arab countries. It was a peaceful uprising to calling for change. He opened fire on the demonstrators, and he and his son made those terrible speeches that eventually led the Libyans, and I'm not saying that they were right to carry arms against him, but they did carry arms against him because he had chosen to go down that path. My question to you, and I keep going back to it, what would you have done if you were in Benghazi? Would you have waited to find out what he was going to do to you if you listened to those speeches? This is by no means validating Western
this is such a bogus question.
But I think, Gerald, let me just put this to you really quick.
If somebody's asking for help, I think, Abd al-Harim, you should go there, and the rest of the Arabs, and keep us out of it. There are a lot of problems going on all over the world, and they're no less or more heinous than this. And to keep bringing up this straw man of what you would do if you were in Benghazi, I say to you and everyone else that wants to go take out Gaddafi to pack up your stuff and go there and do it and keep us out of it. It's not our business.
Well, gentlemen, I'm going to have to wrap things up. That's the end of our hour. We're going to have to get going. We want to thank our guest, Mr. Li Guofu, who is a senior research fellow at the China Institute of International Studies. Also, Abderrahim Foucara from Al Jazeera in Washington, and Mr. Gerald Celente, who's a publisher of the TrendsJournal, which forecasts and analyzes business, social, economic, and political trends. We want to remind you to stay with us for our next show tomorrow, which is going to be on the oil market internationally, and coming up next, the hourly news.